Well, good evening, members and officers. It's 6 p.m, so I'm going to start the meeting. I'll start as always, item 1, welcome and announcements. I'm Councillor Dave Harris. I'm the Councillor for Beerchurch Ward, and it's Wednesday the 23rd of July 2025, and this is the Licensing Committee. I will be chairing. To begin the meeting, there are a few matters of housekeeping that I must go through. Action in the event of an emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm does sound, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Runwald Street. This meeting is being recorded for live broadcast over the internet via the council's YouTube channel, and I'll also be available to view afterwards, so welcome to those that are viewing by YouTube. Please, would all speakers in the room use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, as this activates the audio recording. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras. Please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. Now, the provisions in the Constitution of the Council around the timing of breaks will apply to this meeting, and we will take a break at 7:30 or 19:30, depending on the items of business remaining. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room for those who need it. Introductions. I will now ask members of the committee and attending officers to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Councillor McSpindler, Shrub End Ward.
Andrew Tyrrell, Head of Public Protection.
Paul Donachie, Licensing, Community Safety and Safeguarding Manager.
Sarah White, Licensing Team Leader.
Catherine Spindler from the Saints Ward.
Councillor Camacho Follow for Castle Ward.
Councillor Lee Scordis, serving for Councillor Alaki Akinyemi.
Councillor Jocelyn Law, Communities and Public Protection Portfolio Holder and Ward Councillor for Hirewoods.
Roger Buston, Prettygate Ward.
Lewis Barber, Lexington Brazier Ward.
Councillor Powling, Mersey Fleet Ward.
Councillor Claire Osborne, Shrub End Ward.
Councillor Paul Smith, Anson St John's Ward.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much for those introductions. We will note, of course, the attendance of the portfolio holder, Councillor Jocelyn Law. I'm very grateful for her to be in attendance. Thank you. Declarations of interest is item 4. Has anybody in the room, any councillor, got any publicly declaring items that they need to declare at this time that's on the agenda? Councillor Law.
I think it should be obvious, but obviously I've got an interest as the Communities and Public Protection Portfolio Holder, but I just wanted to note that for the record.
Thank you very much, Councillor Law, so we'll note that for the minutes. Thank you. Item 5, inviting the committee to confirm as a true record the minutes of the Licence Committee held on the 21st of May 2025 and the 11th of June 2025. Any comments, members? Do anyone want to propose and second that as a true record?
I propose.
Councillor Buston and Councillor Smith. Thank you very much. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you so much. Item 6, have your say. I am pleased to say, members, we have got a Sean Moore who wants to have their say tonight as part of the have your say of this committee, and you're very welcome. You'll have 3 minutes, Mr. Moore, to speak. You'll get 2 minutes, then you hear a bell. When you hear the bell, don't panic, you've got another minute to go. You're very welcome, and welcome to this committee.
Thank you. I'm Sean. Well, I'm a Hackney driver in Colchester. If I'm honest, we've got the new policy that is going to be put forward and coming out, and there was just a few things in there really that it basically is what I want to talk about. You've got on here about the unmet demand survey, you changed it to 5 years. I believe the best practice is every 3 years. Like, is there a reason for this? Also, in the policy, it says that you're thinking of getting rid of the knowledge test for private hire drivers, but not Hackney drivers. But it's a dual licence, so you could apply for a private hire and then just become a Hackney. Also, there's no mention of taxi marshals in the new policy. Is there a reason for that? Also, on Appendix 1, 45 of the policy, it says, you must not take payment up front unless it's out of town. But if the customer refuses, you still have to take them. That doesn't make sense. I've noticed there is another thing in there about high visibility jackets, that we have to have one for every person in the car. Just another expense for us, although I do understand it. Also, I've got some notes here which are more for the actual licensing officers, where they've copy and pasted Hackney carriage stuff to the private hire stuff that doesn't apply to private hires. And there's one thing in it, it says, in the Hackney one, it says you must not employ or permit any unlicensed driver to drive your vehicle, but yet it doesn't say that in the private hire one. So does that mean that Uber can just have anyone driving their car without a licence? And I think that is actually me done.
That's very good feedback. So thank you for those questions. At any stage, you can always email the licensing team, of course. But thank you for the question. If you could turn your microphone off now, I'm going to ask the officers, whoever chooses, to answer those very salient points and queries from you. Over to the officers, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll pick up some of those. I think if you could just send those through, we can address the detailed points, because they're all, if you could make those points in relation to the consultation, so that we can pick it up in its totality in due course. In terms of the unmet demand, it's been changed in the best practice to 5 years. That's why we're mirroring 5 years, not 3 years now. And the same is true about the knowledge test. We're not saying that we should remove the knowledge test. It's a question that's posed to us as to whether it's appropriate to have a knowledge test for for private hires. We do issue a dual licence, and it would mean separating out and issuing separate licences. Having had a very quick conversation with just a very small number of drivers, there didn't seem to be much appetite to do that, but that's why we're going out to consultation to ask, because it is a suggestion. It's a suggestion that the knowledge test causes a problem in drivers, or the topographical test of the knowledge test causes a problem for drivers. Our evidence from our examiners doesn't support that view. That is not the problem drivers face in getting through the knowledge test. It's other issues, principally knowledge of the policy, that causes a delay in applicants passing the knowledge test. So there is no particular appetite from the officer side of the table to change anything currently, but as it's in the best practice, it's included as a question to go out to consultation. The other points, I think, we can pick up separately with Mr. Moore, and we'll double check those appendices. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that. You've now got a further minute, Mr. Moore, under the council's rules and regs, where you can now reply to that. And you don't have to take the whole minute. You can just take a few seconds, or any of it or none of it. It's up to you. You heard what has been said.
You know, if I'm honest, I'm happy just sending it to them to look at. So, yeah, no further questions, really.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Moore. And I would like to thank you on behalf of the Vice Chair and the whole committee, to thank you for coming along and having your say. We always welcome feedback from the trade. That's a good thing to happen, and certainly don't hesitate to email the officers when you need them. Thank you very much, Mr. for coming along. Thank you. Members, back to the agenda. Item 7, the taxi policy CCTV in licensed vehicles. The committee will now consider a report which provides it with the information relevant to the installation of CCTV in licensed vehicles. It details financial implications, licensing requirements, as well as legal information services recommendations. And I invite the licensing officer to present the report on item 7, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will present this report today as it's my recommendations that are on there. The report has obviously been circulated with large amounts of other information to the Licensing Committee members, and it regards the installation of CCTV in licensed vehicles. And the new format requires me to make a recommended decision, and it is my recommending decision that we do not mandate CCTV within the Hackney carriages or private hire vehicles, instead encouraging owners, operators, drivers to fit the CCTV as a proportionate way of improving safety, reducing crime and protecting both them and the travelling public. We should provide guidance on the correct usage of such systems as set by the Information Commissioner's Office, encouraging those that choose to fit CCTV to comply with the regulations, and I would request that as part of this consideration that it goes out to public consultation. The reasons for my recommended decision are well known, do include the proportionality, intrusive surveillance of individuals when balanced against the low levels of reported crime in taxis by or against taxi drivers, the requirement on the council to become the data controller if we mandate CCTV, as well as the financial burden and impact on staffing levels within the licensing team would need to increase. There's also the unanswered question or problem of cross-border licensing, in which drivers who do not wish to have mandated CCTV could simply remove themselves from our oversight and relicense elsewhere. We've spoken to our prospective partner councils under LGR. With regards to mandated CCTV, they have not done so, nor have expressed a desire to do so. The alternative options are to mandate CCTV, or in fact removing the question of CCTV out of the new policy entirely. Obviously, I have rejected those as the options in my recommendations. The background information, it's well known that we have an obligation to protect the travelling public and a statutory duty to ensure that drivers are fit and proper, safe and suitable. And that duty is enduring and is relevant at first licensing and for the duration of the licence. We must also look at statutory legislation and best practice guidance. We are looking to amend the standing policy and obviously to improve its clarity and reflect the changes made by the government and regulatory advisory bodies to improve the standards and enforcement across the country. Since this question was first raised, well before my time, there have been changes. The NR3 system, so the National Register of Refusal, Revocations and Suspensions, allows enforcement and licence checks across the country for those who have dipped below the required standards, which is a system we never had before, but allows us to stop licensing people who have been revoked or refused licences previously elsewhere. Central government is now producing their best guidance and recommendations, and as the committee are well aware, we are all working very hard to get a national standard if at all possible. I was just saying that the intention is to include within the new policy guidance notes on what should be fitted if CCTV is chosen to be fitted, and we would obviously be able to ensure that through inspections it is the correct CCTV system, and within the policy we would have the right to access all footage. As a data controller, it's ours. I don't wish to go through every point, Chair, otherwise we'll be here all week. One of the key considerations for moving forward is the Information Commissioner's guidance. which is important that we establish who exercises overall control of the data being processed. So when we decide what is to be recorded, how it should be used, and to whom it may be disclosed, as the organisation making those determinations, we become the legal controller and responsible for compliance with data protection law. So just to clarify, if we mandate CCTV, we will be the data controller. The system put forward, this is on the advice and expertise of our own IT information compliance team, and therefore I am not personally an expert, so I can only share what's been provided. There's no expected issues in relation to equality and diversity, although there will be a full equality impact assessment as well as a data impact assessment would be required. We would request consultation, and the 151 officer was approached with regards to the financial implications because it is, again, a question of expertise. So currently, due to the substantial cuts to local government funding, which have led to significant financial challenges for the sector, the 151 officer explains that the council need to be mindful of all spend and manage as best possible within existing budgets and mitigate against potential overspends. The 151 officer, the expectation from the 151 officer is that budget holders will work with finance business partners to find options and solutions to maintain balanced budgets, cognizant of the fact there will be some external financial pressures outside of our control. Consequently, the Section 151 officer supports the report, recommending the decision that the council does not mandate CCTV within hackney carriages or private hire vehicles, but instead encourages use of CCTV as a way of improving safety and reducing crime for both them and the travelling public. Mandating CCTV installation will cause a one-off and ongoing financial burden to the council. As per the table below, the initial figure was 542,400. We know that those costs are out of date and would need to be revisited, but I can't imagine they've got less. The capitalisation of the costs have been explored but should not be pursued. Hence, this would remain a revenue pressure. And if the council was to mandate the installation, the council would need to purchase and install the cameras, and this may be treated as capital expenditure only if the council retains ownership and control. However, such treatment would raise questions around asset deployment, tracking and ownership, system portability between vehicles, recovery of equipment when licences lapse, and this would add a layer of complexity and an administrative burden, and hence capitalisation of the equipment is not recommended. There is a breakdown of the CCTV costs from the previous assessment. So when we look at health, wellbeing and community safety implications, the installation of CCTV, whether by encouragement or mandated, is likely to enhance the protection of drivers and the public. Drivers will be better protected against criminal activities and false allegations, thereby improving their working conditions and reducing personal risk. CCTV will also assist in the investigation of complaints and may function as a deterrent to those wishing to use licensed vehicles in criminal activities. These benefits are already in place for a number of drivers and their passengers because some licensed vehicles have already chosen to install CCTV. Any further benefit is likely to be seen quicker. CCTV is not made mandatory because the process will be quicker and unaffected by devolution. In considering the proposed introduction in licensed vehicles, the LGA, Local Government Association guidance of developing a mandatory approach to CCTV states that the law is clear that the use of CCTV and audio in taxis must be proportionate to the risks presented, and councils will need to set out a clear justification of why they believe there is a need for visual and audio recording if applicable. The main rationale for using audio recording is that this pick up any inappropriate conversations between passengers and drivers, for example, when they're carrying children. Authorities will need to assess whether audio recording is necessary based on local circumstances and be able to justify this. The ICO's guidance is that the public must have confidence that the use of surveillance systems is lawful, fair, transparent and meets the other standards set in data protection law. The rights and freedoms of individuals can be greatly affected where decisions are made about them based on particularly intrusive means of processing personal data. We would be required to demonstrate that any new monitoring systems implementation is designed with privacy by default and proportionate to the risks identified by the e.g. by the crime rate. This assessment should be evidence-based and have regard to the number of offences and serious offences, and they would need to be sufficiently high to mandate CCTV. Obviously, figures have been provided that show the crime rates as we have them currently. We must obviously realise that reports in the press and elsewhere of high-profile safeguarding cases in other areas underline the need for safeguarding issues to be addressed, and the response of the government and regulating advisory bodies was to make a number of changes to guidance and statutory standards. The Casey review obviously has mentioned that the government are looking at taxis and the safe standards. So again, a lot of what we're discussing may very well be superseded in the future by the Casey report. The licensing and regulation of the trade has significantly improved since the licensing committee first considered the imposition of CCTV. The government is seeking to address the safeguarding challenges in relation to licensed vehicles, but have stopped short of mandating CCTV in licensed vehicles. And the general position across the country is therefore not considered sufficient to justify mandatory imposition. We would have to demonstrate a compelling case for the imposition of mandatory CCTV, and its imposition is proportionate to the locally identified risks. We do accept that that assessment is difficult, as it is believed that crimes perpetrated on and by taxi drivers is underreported. And obviously it would be hard to know how much crime would be prevented by CCTV, or indeed how much is currently prevented by CCTV. The tables, as I said, set out the details below. In assessing the complaints made to the Council since 2022, disregarding the impact of COVID, witness statements were provided and the matter could have progressed to court. CCTV would have been useful in a small number of cases, but only with the inclusion of sound, which would have provided context. The ICO only permit the recording of sound in limited situations by way of operation of a panic button, and it is therefore unlikely that sound would be available for the majority of cases. I will say, from a personal case, all of the recent complaints, or since I've been in post, where I have gone to court and had my decisions challenged, they've all been upheld, and none of those would have had CCTV, or any benefit of CCTV would have changed the outcome. Attacks on taxi drivers do occur both in and out of the vehicle, and installation of CCTV may have an impact on in-vehicle assaults, and it may be a deterrent to those intending to make off without payment or engage in other illegal activities. There has been extensive consultation in the past with the trade on the issue of CCTV. However, that was before the pandemic, before and during the pandemic, and therefore, due to the time elapsed, it would suggest a further consultation would be essential to get the trade's up-to-date view. Health and safety, the systems to be fitted must comply with the latest safety requirements, as they will be fitted to the vehicle post-production and wired into the vehicle, which will require expert installation and maintenance to reduce any fire risk and risks associated with a vehicle collision. Risk management implications, obviously the data risk, as in being responsible for any breaches through both the driver's actions or through hacking of the council systems. And this is a significant risk that will need to be reflected within the council's risk management policy. The other issue we've already dealt with, mandating CCTV or passing on the revenue or costs associated with the cloud-based system may result in the shift of private hire trade from licensing in Colchester to those authorities that do not mandate CCTV. It's not known how many may choose to pursue this option, but the previous strength of feeling displayed by the trade against mandatory CCTV was previously strong. It's considered that the risk must be considered. Again, going back to the fact that that data would need to be reassessed through a consultation. No impact on environmental and sustainability issues, unless, of course, the cost passed to drivers and operators encourage them to give up the trade, in which case we would have a less number of taxis. The other side of that, of course, is less vehicles on the road, less harmful emissions. And finally, devolution and local government reorganisation implications. If the decision is taken to recommend mandatory CCTV, a more detailed report will need to be presented to yourselves. This would contain the newest associated costs and legal implications. It's understood that this would not be a decision for the licensing committee and would be a recommendation to full council. It is assumed that the Cabinet and scrutiny will need to be engaged in this process, which would need to be a period of consultation. So we're asking for 3 months as per previous policies. The implementation of mandatory CCTV would need to be phased in. Given the associated costs, it would be unreasonable to give a notice period of less than a year to drivers, as they would need to plan for the increased expenditure, which would move the implementation date closer to or indeed into devolution. And finally, it's unclear currently how the current licensing functions with ourselves will be discharged under LGR, and indeed there is a government consultation looking at whether local transport authorities, such as the new Mayor's Office, will take over taxi licensing, which means, and as they're doing that, it does suggest a potential move to a national standard and the Mayor's Office taking over, and they may then obviously change the CTV view. So that's the report. I obviously pass that to you, Chair.
Thank you very much for a very full and comprehensive report. Councillor Spindler, as my Vice Chair, and myself will be keeping an eye out for those who want to speak. I think Michael's already started a list of speakers, but before I bring in that list of speakers, I don't know if your safety manager wanted to have a few words before we start the debate?
Not especially, Chair, unless there's something that comes out of the discussion. I'd be interested to hear what the committee have to say.
Thank you very much. What I intend to know is bring in the portfolio holder, Councillor Law.
Thank you very much, Chair. Obviously, I've come along today to listen with interest to what members say. You will appreciate, I know that this issue has been around for some time, I think predating when I joined the council, and I get the sense that people feel that this has been sort of sitting in the background and people feel that they want to see some progression, and I completely understand that there may be frustration that nothing seems to have happened on this topic so far. You know, I think it's really important to prioritise safety and welfare of our drivers and of the public. But to also do that, we need to think about resourcing and all the implications of data and data ownership. You know, I'm sure that many people like myself who work in their roles, perhaps for work outside of council, concerned with handling personal data, appreciate the difficulty and the need to stick to regulations, and also what happens when you become the data controller and all those implications. So whenever you start talking about data ownership, that really can present a significant burden. You know, I would be, you know, I think it would be very helpful if this issue went out to public consultation. And as I understand it, this issue, we could choose to put this issue out for public consultation without making a firm decision at this time, but we could actually get some fresh information, not just from drivers, but also the public, nighttime economy workers, and we could use that information. We could have a consultation that could come back to the committee, say in the autumn, and that could inform any sort of future drafting of that particular part of a policy. I think that would be very helpful. I hope that's all right, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Law. Thank you very much. Councillor Spinder, in order of... And the first speaker is Councillor Catherine Spindler. Thank you.
Only a quick one, and apologies if I've missed this and it's already on this. If anybody has got these CCTVs in the car, do they have a very obvious sticker on the car that you can see before you enter it? That was all.
Good question. Thank you.
Currently, because we aren't in charge of CCTV, or we haven't encouraged it and introduced the process of what best practice would be under the ICO guidelines, we have no way of saying whether they do or don't. What I would say is, if you are using CCTV personally, for your own personal use, personal protection, and you are filming the public, they should be aware. And that would be the information that we would expect them to have. But at the moment, because we're not giving them the regulations, I have no way of saying whether they will or won't. And there's also issues of, are they using their dash cams as a CCTV system? Is it automatically recording audio? And one of the reasons we want to get advice and guidance out is to protect drivers from inadvertently breaking the regulations and the legislation and using the data incorrectly. It's not just about us being Big Brother, but actually providing some information and support back to the trade.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just, if you're a customer and you wanted to have it there, it's nice to be able to see. And if you're a customer, it's nice to know whether it's there, whether you want to enter that vehicle or not. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you. I've got three other speakers. Councillor Scourders first, then Councillor Barber, and then Councillor Cavall. So, Councillor Scourders first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for the comprehensive report. It seems kind of a grey area. The easy thing to say would be, of course, CCTV and protect cabbies and so forth. And then you've got this rather grey area that very few councils do it. I think there are questions of, even if you had CCTV in there, would that stop an assault or so forth? It would help with any prosecution, of course. But most people wouldn't look for that sign, especially if they've been drinking too much and other instances. So there are questions of whether that would stop that. And I think you've shown figures. I mean, one crime is too many, but when you think about how many taxi journeys there are in a week and a day, actually those numbers are quite low. But as I say, one crime is too much, but we can't be held responsible for people's actions on most things. What does concern me is, firstly, with the costings, obviously you said they're out of date, Paul. What could happen is someone who has a licence with Braintree might go, oh, I get free CCTV if I go to Colchester because they're going to install it for me if we went forward with that. Or vice versa, as we said, if we suggested that they have to do it themselves, taxi drivers may decide, no, I'll get a licence with Uttlesford, Malden, and I don't have to do that, and I can still operate here. And I have seen cars that operate with an Uttlesford and Braintree licence in my own area because they're parked up at night. So that could easily happen. So it could be a redundant tool. So there's the worry that we end up paying loads because people think, oh, I get free CCTV, or it just becomes redundant in the whole purpose. And I guess the big thing we have to look at actually is devolution and how that will change it. And the worry is that we spend a lot of capital expenditure on this, and then we have a new mayor who was going to either do that anyway, or decides they don't want to do that and they want to don't want to be the data controller and want to remove all CCTV, and that money is public money that has gone nowhere. So I think they're quite big concerns for us to consider as a committee. as I say, it's always seemed like the sensible thing to do, but actually it is a grey area around this that does concern me, especially around the GDPR. So I'll leave it for the debate, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scalders. There's a couple of questions in there I think could do an answer. And one of them which was that I think Councillor Scalders referred to other areas that have got mandatory. Our IT department and licensing appear to be unable to find solutions that other councils have found. Did you want to make any comment on that?
With regards to data or the systems, is that what you mean, Chair?
Mandatory CCTV
Okay,
cameras.
right. So obviously not reached out to every CCTV system. So for an example of someone who's done it, Southampton do this and have done so since about 2008, maybe 2009. They currently have one installation supplier, and they give the drivers the opportunity to have a system put in place. For expenditure, to take away the aspect of free CCTV, it's at least £600 prior to VAT for each taxi driver to have that system put in. And that's before you look at any ongoing maintenance. The data within their system is, and I think it's probably due to how long they've been doing it, is based in a locked system where it's recorded within the vehicle and held. Whether that is the option because that's what they've always done, but our ICO team or our IT team have said it needs to be cloud-based for security and control. Again, that is a matter for their expert advice. With regards to Southampton, if they receive a complaint or an allegation, the vehicle is called in to the office and 2 members of staff need to be there to download the information. If the requesting authority is the police and there aren't 2 council members of staff available, a police officer will accompany the council worker to download that information. It has to be on a standalone laptop that is not linked to any other system. And Southampton have had to recruit an extra 2.5 enforcement officers to deal with the system. So that's regards cost. Now, I will say, because I like to be transparent, they have doubled the taxis. So we would have, if we were going to go with the same 1.25 extra officers purely to deal with this matter. And again, their system is a system that's been running since 2008. On the other side of the coin, the information I shared previously about two councils that one have mandated it and one who were going to mandate it. The council that were going to mandate had a start date for 2024. It didn't come to fruition, and they are now revisiting. In fact, they've decided they're not going to proceed due to the data issues and cost. And the other council that do mandate it have now opened a public consultation to remove it. And one of the issues around that is the licensing, basically the Wolverhampton question of being able to go elsewhere. So the issue of CCTV, that those who've had it have had it for some time, and they've had it because they are in areas that we are well aware of, are part of things like the Casey report, and other areas where they would have had specific crimes or numbers of crimes that were supported by the police. As implementation, the police or the PFCC said, we need it, we support you, you've got the crime problems. That isn't something that's here at the moment, and touch wood, will never be here. The point around prevention, again, it's very hard to quantify what is prevented by CCTV. Let's face it, the UK is blanketed in CCTV, and it doesn't seem to prevent a huge amount because every high street has crime, every premises has crime. It is a good tool for gathering evidence. If you have it monitored 24/7, it's good for crime prevention because you can put resources in place before things happen. But it can be very much a reactive tool rather than a proactive tool. I think that's fairly much covering the points, if I may.
Thank you very much. Satisfied, Councillor Gordis? Thank you very much, thank you. The next speaker I have is Councillor Lewis Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. If it's okay, can I ask just 2 or 3 questions, not including that one? The first query is in the reason for recommended decision. You mentioned about the proportionality of intrusive surveillance balanced against the low levels of reported crimes. How would you square that comment with still encouraging CCTV to be installed in taxis, but in a voluntary sense? Because from my perspective, that doesn't seem so much of an issue around mandatory, but more just a general, I suppose, comment around CCTV. So it'd just be useful to get your thinking around that. Also, for those like myself who weren't involved in this issue when it previously came up, are we okay to get I appreciate talking about consultation for the future, but could we get a flavour of what the consultation responses were like last time we went out, if they're readily at hand? It's not a particular problem if not, but it would be just useful from my understanding. And then actually it's just on LGR and devolution, and I'll just declare an interest here because my role at ECC as Deputy Cabinet Member for Local Government Reform and Devolution. But just a query around that. I think it was actually quite a good point Councillor Scordis made around the timing of this. If we're going to have a year proposal bedding in for mandatory, around how that interacts, particularly I think with the Mayor. I'm less convinced on the point around local government reform if it was retained at a council level, because although the reform's going to be likely on existing local government boundaries, they are just going to be totally different councils. So it's not as if we're merging and continuing as existing authorities. So I'm less convinced on that point, but probably more on Councillor Scordis's point, and combined with your point, Paul and Sarah, about, I suppose, the year bedding in period. I think actually it does call into question, with the elections next May for the Mayor, whether it's more of appropriate time to see the shape of it around then instead on mandatory. Given I think there would be quite understandably a lot of upset among licence holders if we mandate it, they spend a lot of money for, and then we get to a point where actually the Mayor says, I'm totally against this, he or she just removes it. So I think that interaction and the potential of it being a mayoralty function is probably more convincing for my hesitation to probably proceed with mandatory at this time. But I'm quite interested as a relative newbie to this topic of conversation about others on the committee and officers' responses to those as well. But yeah, there are a couple of questions, probably an observation, I suppose, more there. But thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. Any answers?
So just to clarify the first point, around the difference between mandating and encouragement, is obviously, if we mandate it and we're open to challenge about why we're mandating, we have to persuade the ICO and everyone else that we've got a problem that needs to be dealt with via CCTV due to the intrusive nature of, and it's not walking down the high street, it's in a small space, so you'll cover it. And one of the reasons for the advice we want to give out as soon as we can, if possible, is around audio, because audio is one of the most restrictive parts, and you cannot record audio unless you have a specific reason to do so. If we are mandated, so when you look at the crime figures that are on here, what I did want to clarify is that this information, I will say, there is no doubt it's underreported. And I think the trade will admit a lot of the it's not smaller offences, so please don't take this the wrong way. The non-violent offences, the making off without payments. The trade will probably just nod over there when I point out the fact that they probably don't report it because the police won't do anything about it necessarily. Yeah, there you go. And ultimately, CCTV won't change that necessarily because it's not a priority. It's not a violent crime. And I'm not talking on behalf of Essex Police, they will have their own views on that. But these offences, when we asked the police to provide this information, they did it on the basis of the word taxi within their details field. It could have been, I got a taxi to the high street, I got out of the taxi, I walked to McDonald's and I got robbed. The word taxi's in there, therefore that's a crime that's got the word taxi in the details field. So again, statistics, it can be looked at in various ways, but ultimately those may not be, they're not going to be the correct number of offences, because some will have nothing to do with the taxi whatsoever, other than the fact it was the mode of transport to or from a place where a crime took place, where it actually occurred. And others, they will be under reporting because the trade, the particular individual thought, what's the point? Therefore, if we mandate it, we have to justify it. And at the moment, I would say on the crime figures alone, we can't. If we encourage it, we're saying to the trade, this is what you need to do. It's a choice for you as to whether you feel it will benefit you and the public. And we will help you where possible to make sure you're not at risk of breaching any legislation, any laws. You've got it. If something happens, you can share it with us and we will make sure it gets to the police, etc. There's all those sorts of things. So there's a difference between mandatory and encouraging. Yes, the devolution point and the LGR points. The reason we mention LGR in particular is I've been to a number of briefings and there is talk about what the prospective mergings will be. So our colleagues from Tendring and Braintree, ourselves, another or not another, just the three. If we at Colchester, so I know that one of those groups has a policy that was voted in that was agreed in 2023, is not due for renewal till 2028, doesn't have mandatory CCTV in it, and they will not be going to discuss that until obviously a lot later, by which time we're into LGR on it, 1st of April, vesting day. The other group are currently doing their policy, which will be, if it goes this year, will last until 2030, when they won't exist anyway. They'll be part of the new Unitarian Authority, and they don't have mandatory CCTV. So the impact of that is that one of the three trade groups may very well have been given all this costing and all this requirement and join a Unitarian Authority where the people in charge go, well, actually, we're not doing that. I mean, also, the other side of the coin is maybe they'll say it's such a great idea, we'll spread it out. So I'm not going one way or the other. I'm just saying, but if you say it that way. And of course, under the Mayor's Office and devolution, if national government, and possibly even spurred on by Mr Burnham's movement and Casey report and other such things, decide that there will be one standard, one cost, and mandate CCTV, that's great. But at the moment, the government are not going down that road. And therefore, we're almost swimming against the tide when you look at the number of local authorities and the small percentage that have mandated it. And then, as I say, some have changing their minds. So that's the devolution LGR argument. As for the points from the previous consultation, I was far too young to be here when that happened, so I should pass over to my colleagues, who are much younger.
So, Chairman, I've pulled up some of the data from last time. In the region of 36 responses last time we went out on this matter, it was in relation to the taxi policy, but CCTV was included in the tax policy then. So 36 responses to the consultation approximately. So common themes that were pulled out, so it's fair to say the majority were not in favour of mandatory CCTV. The themes that came through were concerns around the ownership of data, recording if the car's being used as a private vehicle, albeit that it's licensed, camera viewpoints for larger vehicles, the use of a panic button, and I know drivers in particular concerned about the level of wiring and the impact on the car of wiring up panic buttons. Whether that's still relevant now, I don't know. Technology has moved on. Access to data by operators and whether CCTV would be required for temporary replacement vehicles. So those were some of the issues that came up. In main, it was cost, concerns about privacy and concerns about panic buttons. Those are the real big ones.
Sorry, just to add, Sarah and I met less than a month ago with 4 of the big operators, and we discussed CCTV. one of the operators was like, we don't have a problem with mandatory CCTV, but we want to be the data controller, which they can't be because of the reasons I've explained. And one of the other large ones has said, well, we would be for it as an operator. We've already written out to all of our drivers previously, and the majority said no. So that's a feel of where we are. Yes, we would have it if we could be data, which you can't control it, and no, the drivers don't want it.
Satisfied?
Can I just ask one little question, just on that point, Dave? Can providers mandate it and be within terms of their use of their branding, I suppose? Can they mandate it and be the data controller in those circumstances where we as a council are not mandating it out of interest?
Sorry, by that you mean if an operator decide, yeah, no, it's fine. The issue for that operator is if they mandate it, it's no different to us mandating it. That driver will go, well, I don't want it, and they'll go and sign up for another operator. I would imagine that would be, it's that freedom of choice for those people, because it's like, I don't need to work for that company because there are Ubers and 3 or 4 or 5 other operators that would still employ me.
But in principle, that's just down to them as a private organisation to decide on. Okay, thank you.
That's correct, thank you.
Andrew?
If it helps, it's the person that mandates it becomes the data controller by default, is the simple answer. And they would face the same, you know, we have to challenge it if we mandate it. They're probably licensed with a different authority. The taxi operator has the issue. If they mandate it, they'd probably work for an operator. If the driver decides to choose it, then they're the data controller, but they're the data controller for just their individual use. It's much easier for them to manage that risk because they know what they're using it for and what they're not using it for. So they've got greater control over their own individual use. I was just going to pick up a couple of the earlier points. I mean, if it helps, the reason we're recommending consultation now and the 3 months as standard period is because we will have the decision on LGR in September. We will have the Casey review, we're told, in autumn, which for me means at the latest October. I mean, we'll see if that timetable is met, but a decision in either direction would be very, very helpful because obviously if they say it should be mandated nationally, that changes the liabilities and the risks for the council. If they say you shouldn't be doing it, that's useful information to know to make an informed decision. And we do have also, we then know potentially around where the taxi licensing sits in future around the authority split. And we would obviously have greater public validity to the consultation because I'd like to think we can push for more than 36 answers and it would be current information. So I think all of that would help make a more informed decision in a few months' time. The first step, if we decided tonight to do it, would be consult anyway. So we might as well do the consultation and then make a decision on it with all of that information to hand. So I hope that helps where we were coming from.
So, thank you for your question as well. And the next councillor I've got is Councillor Kamal Kafu, who very helpfully sent these questions in, but I'm guessing you might want to add to those as well. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. I must start my speech by praising and thanking Paul for the detailed report he prepared. Personally, I learned a lot, and I'm grateful that offices included analysis and commentary on capital expenditure, the limited difference that audio recordings may bring, potential reactions from the trade if we decide to impose CCTV, and again, potential data breach risks as well. They were all very useful. Thank you, Paul. So moving to my questions, I would start with requesting some clarification. So after the original consultation, which was made in 2017, it was decided that the current Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy that came into effect in January 2019 wouldn't include a mandatory imposition of CCTV due to trade representatives' opposition, and instead a working group was set up to enable further investigation into its feasibility and costs. Is that an accurate interpretation of facts?
Yes.
Thank you. However, it is also acknowledged that the costs set out in this report are outdated, and as calculating the updated costs would incur additional costs, it was considered necessary to obtain the views of the SMT before allocating further officer resources to achieve an up-to-date estimated cost. What is an SMT, please?
Senior management team, the big
Thank you
bosses.
very much. Right, thank you. Moving to my next question, section 6.4 and 7.1 state that only a cloud-based CCTV will be GDPR compliant. However, section 6.5 states that information in relation to specification and cost is based on information obtained 2-3 years ago and will require revision. Could it be therefore clarified if a cloud-based CCTV system is still the only GDPR compliant way?
Good question.
We have included the current IC, Information Controller Manager, Laura Wheeler, in these conversations, and that is still the position.
Thank you very much, Paul. And can I get clarification on whether the information in question was indeed obtained 2-3 years ago? That's because the consultation took place in 2017 and the decision to adopt the policy without CCTV mandate was made. However, if a group was set up in 2019 to look into this further, then these findings on specifications and costs mentioned in the current report should be 5-6 years old rather than 2-3 years old. Is that a correct interpretation of chronological facts?
Chairman, when it was initially considered, it was not initially considered as a cloud-based system. It was initially considered as a standalone system. When the issues were raised in response to the consultation, which was around about 2019, it was decided to have the further investigation. And at that point, the decision was taken that a standalone system would not be GDPR compliant, so only a cloud-based system would be suitable, and we've been at that position ever since. I'm not entirely sure in terms of your question, but that's the timeline from our point of view. When it went originally, it was not cloud-based, and therefore, in essence, was a little similar, a little easier, and now it's cloud-based, it's slightly more complicated.
Thank you very much, Sarah. My next question is about section 7.3. It states that audio control will be under the driver's control and permitted only when a panic button is activated. Would that be the case if CCC is managing it, or would this be up to taxi drivers, as they will be the ones responsible for management and compliance with GDPR?
This is based on ICO guidance. Because of the severity of recording audio, because of the way it's viewed as being very, very intrusive, it should only be recorded because a particular situation is developed which requires the panic button. It matters not who the data controller is in this case. What it means is that whoever is the data controller would have to comply with those requirements. So if the drivers chose to put it in and followed the ICO guidance, that's what they would do.
Thank you very much, Paul. Moving to my next question, the technical specification states that from the initial work done, it appeared that some suppliers would struggle to meet all the elements within the specification. Is that again based on current research, or is it from the one that dates back several years?
That's based on what goes back several years. We did revisit this with ICT when we were preparing this work, but they would need to be considerable engagement with the suppliers to get more detailed confirmation, which is then when we then referred the matter onto the senior management team as to whether or not they wanted to spend officer time carrying out that work.
Thank you, Sarah. And section 10.1 states that traveling public needs to be educated. Would that duty lie with us, or if you proceed with taxi drivers as the primary information handler will be theirs. I mean, personally, I believe in both cases, it would be beneficial to have a cooperative and collaborative approach with drivers. But yeah, just a quick question, and do we have any estimates on potential cost?
We don't have an estimated cost, but what I would say is if we were to mandate CCTV, then obviously we would need to be publicising quite heavily the fact that that's what we would do. We would also be requiring drivers to have stickers, etc., that say that the travelling public are being recorded. But again, that requirement exists from the ICO anyway, so whoever was doing it would need to have the relevant stickers. If we encourage, I don't see any problem whatsoever, even as a council, whether we mandate or encourage, having sections on the licensing website which is being updated, saying about CCTV in taxis and outlining the situation, because you know that's what we don't want people to be surprised, and also it's just good practice. But it would be something once we know the direction of travel, pardon the pun, to actually come up with that education.
Thank you very much, Paul. Moving to my next question, do we know if the ICO suggested those 7 suppliers that we approached?
The ICO wouldn't have been involved in that process. This was an internal council process. The ICO deal with the regulations. They wouldn't necessarily be involved in the supply of the devices.
Thank you very much. And my very last question, which is linked to the previous point shared by Councillor Catherine Spindler. Page 23 states that expert installation and maintenance will be required to lessen any fire risk and any risk associated with a vehicle collision. Do we know how many of them are compliant with that at the moment?
No, we don't, because we would have to identify the suitable systems, and that would require an expertise well below, beyond ourselves. So that would be part of the information that, and the trade would need to be told which systems they could have fitted. But again, if you're putting panic buttons and systems in and systems in the boot that are recording data, there's obviously additional wiring you wouldn't normally find in a vehicle. So it will require expert installation.
Thank you very much, Chair. That I ask all my questions. Thank you.
And thank you very much for putting them in writing in advance as well. That is very helpful. The next speaker is Councillor Buston.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, here we are again. The only people that I can recall that were on this quest, if I can call it such, when it first started, were you and me and Sarah, who I think is sick to the back teeth of it. We've been going round and round and round this boy now for more years than I can remember. In fact, I think we are the only people here, still here, that were here when it started. I'm a fervent believer that CCTV in taxis should be mandatory on the basis that we have it in trains, we have it in buses, we have it virtually all over the place for public protection. It's not for the delight of viewers, it's for public protection. Having said that, and everybody will know that that is my stance and my position, since we started all this 10 years ago, and we've wasted countless man and woman hours on it since, various new large elephants have moved into the room, and they've actually moved into the room relatively recently. And I think it would be stupid of us not to recognise these large elephants that are suddenly with us. Notably, there is a view and a direction of travel that I welcome towards national standards. It's mentioned online, it's been mentioned in the correspondence that the chairman's had with Andy Burnham and others, with whose campaign we have joined in and support. And that, frankly, is the way we need to go in this. Otherwise, we'll have lots and lots of little local authorities squabbling between themselves as to what is the right system, what's not the right system, who's going to pay for it, and the like. And that's a complete waste of time. And I'm encouraged by the fact that there is at least a hint of a direction of travel going this way. And I think if we throw our weight behind anything, that's what we should be throwing our weight behind now. That's not to say that we shouldn't show up as an exemplar of good practice. But nonetheless, we have to recognise that. The other elephant in the room that's just come into the room is that we must recognise that under LGR, it is more than likely that licensing will become a mayoral responsibility. April the 1st, April Fool's Day. Work out what you will on that one. How on earth the mayoral authority for Greater Essex is going to deal with all the things that we deal with now on a local basis, God only knows. But it will be worked out, and I'm sure a plan, workable or not, will come. Moving on from there, I'd just like to say that Paul's report was one of the best reports that I've seen since we've ever started doing this. It is thorough, it is fair, it is balanced, it drills down into uncomfortable areas and areas that we haven't really explored before, and I think have been all the better for being exposed as they have. And I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that they have informed how we have put together the next item, the taxi policy. And the report has been so thorough in what it's done and how it's presented it that I'm of a mind to support that, which I wasn't before, because I think it's a direction of travel that we can proceed in on the basis of the new elephants in the room. We don't want to waste money. We don't want to waste public money. We don't want to waste the trade's money in doing things that they don't have to do. Nonetheless, we still have to be aware of the public safety aspect. And I think encouraging people to fit CCTV can be the way round that, or encouraging that. In the little chart that Paul very kindly put in his report about offences committed in various times, I share Councillor Scordis's view. One sexual offence in a vehicle or violence against a person in a vehicle is one too many. And in 22, there appear to have been 5 sexual offences, 24 violence against the person, and they've gone up and down since. Actually, I know we've got a lot of taxis, but that's a lot. I'd rather like to see none. And anything that we can do to encourage that, we must do. So, in the next item on the agenda is not going to do away with CCTV recommendation completely. I will therefore support that on the basis of the elephants in the room. Going into elephants in the room, one thing that's not been brought out is the ICO, and I do think we need to make a point to the ICO. The ICO is being actually totally inconsistent in what it does. Who is the data controller for all the data that's collected on the railway trains? Who is the data controller for all the data that's collected on the bus you get on to come here, those that did? I cannot imagine that it's the Department of Transport. In other words, there is a degree of inconsistency in this that needs, in the national discussion, which is going to happen on this, I think, to be addressed, and I would like us to make that point. I'd like us to make that point in the interests of achieving a way forward to where we want to go in regard to this. There must be a cheaper way of doing this. The costs that are quoted is like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It is hideously expensive, and I'm not convinced that that is necessarily the way to go. I really am not. Lastly, in encouraging our drivers to have CCTV in their taxis, which I think has to be the way forward, regretfully, I would like to take a bet with anybody who would take me on this of 6pence, all right, 5 shillings, in real money, that all the drivers that have CCTV at the moment haven't got a clue about data protection or what the ICO says or what the ICO requires. And much as though we encourage, and we will encourage, and it's right to encourage, we need to be careful in doing that, that we therefore don't expose ourselves to the fact that the drivers don't know what they're doing, I would suggest. Anyway, so there we are. Probably a rather unexpected comment from me, but I think it's necessary to say that, and I mean about the reports and everything and my view on it, but I think the reports have been sufficiently comprehensive and good, and the points that have been brought out tonight have been sufficiently mature for me to be able to say that and say which way I will now proceed in relation to the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buston. There's a couple of questions in there, I thought.
The most important one for me, Chair, is much as it's lovely to hear my name in a positive light for a change, the actual credit goes to the officers and Sarah. They do the majority of the work and I just sit at the top and take the credit. So in the interest of fairness, that's the three that deserve the credit. As for the specific questions, the issue around, I think probably the big fear that was mentioned, that's been mentioned in other meetings and conversations, is if we start telling drivers what the regulations are, it may lead them to remove the CCTV. That is a danger. Of course it is. There's no point saying otherwise. However, whilst we as a team have a duty to protect the public, we provide a service to the taxi drivers as best we can. They may not always see it as a service. I'm sure there's a few who definitely don't. But it's a professional pride to say that we are protecting them as well. And it's unfair of us to be aware of the regulations they may be putting themselves at risk of breaking. GDPR regulations, as you know, data breaches can be hideously expensive for the person who breaches data. You know, you talk about percentages of salaries or incomes fee and things like that. If a driver is a professional, and the majority of them are, and they want to have CCTV, they will want to do it properly because the risk to themselves is great. Because if somebody alleges that their data, it's a simple mistake of something making its way onto social media, and as the data controller, they find themselves embroiled in some major ICO issue, and they never knew that they were actually breaching it. They're recording audio, and it's just like, well, no, it's one of the taxis. You know, I was just driving my taxi, and I did that for my own protection. Yeah, but you've breached, bang, 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 and they have no way of knowing that, or it's never been explained to them. Then we're not doing them any service either. So in some ways, when it comes to balance, it's only fair that we make sure they're aware, with the risk that they may turn around and say it's too much of a risk. But it's better that we do it, in my opinion, and obviously I will be guided on that.
I'm not suggesting it isn't aware, but it's just something that we flag up.
Satisfied with the answers? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for that, and thank you, the girls and boys at the back as well, and Mrs. Donaghy for allowing you the time off.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much for that. Yes, the next councillor I've got is Councillor Paul Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's very clear, the position, that where we are is that this is the wrong time to go for a mandatory process. We've got the Casey report coming in. We've got the impact of local government reform, where we don't know whether it's going to be local councils, the mayor, dealing with the system, and we would be absolutely stupid to impose a new system now that is going to be scrapped in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months time, despite there being a great deal of merit in the arguments being put forward. The only thing I would add is, Councillor Buston, never underestimate the knowledge of a taxi driver. I remember one gentleman winning Mastermind, wasn't it? We're going back a long time now, probably before certain councillors in the room were born, but I might just have the 5 shillings on the good name of the taxi drivers.
Mr. Howjigo it was.
Any questions in Councillor Smith?
No, they've already been answered,
Okay.
thank you.
Councillor Smith, thank you for that. Any other councillors that haven't had a say yet? I see no indications. Councillor Law, in your preamble, you were talking about the possibility, and I think you made several remarks in the entrance there about the preamble about the possibility of having 2 themes, 2 consultations, one on the CCTV and one on the policy itself. Is that still your view?
I think that would be helpful if members were happy with that.
Is there a proposal for that? Councillor Scordis.
Yeah, I guess obviously this has been a long-running issue for the committee as well, so it seems a shame just to be blanket not doing it. Would we be able to make the agreed action to remove all mention of CCTV in the current policy, which is part of the wording already, but for a CCTV to go out to consultation and to be looked at in the future by licensing, which gives the officers again more time to maybe look at other examples. And if a committee hate it at the next meeting, then it's all gone.
So is there a proposal or a second, or was that?
I'd propose that, Chair. So we keep the wording around removing any mention of CCTV in item 8 in the main policy, but we agree for a separate consultation to go out for CCTV for the committee to look at a future date.
I've got 2 indications. Councillor Barber?
I'm personally not sure about that, but in any event, I don't think that could come up until the next agenda item anyway, so I think we'd have to deal with that. Well, I'm going after this, but I won't be personally. But in terms of the remainder of the committee, I think it's probably one for the next agenda. But I think I'm worried that would confuse matters in terms of the wider policy. If we did that, I would probably prefer, if we were going to look at something, take it as a standalone consultation separate from the taxi policy, and just gain views on either or from the trade to bring it up to date with where we're at as a sort of information gathering for future, be it us or another authority to have awareness of.
Councillor Osborne, I think you indicated.
I would like to second and support that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I've got a proposal there, and I've also got the recommended decision, so I've got more indication.
Thank you, Chair. I think the flow of the report and the flow of the next item, which do conflate to a certain extent, recommended the inclusion of not mandatory but recommended, and that was what I supported. I did not support, and Paul will remember this because I said it with some vehemence, a complete cutting out of CCTV completely, because I think that wouldn't be doing anybody a service. And I think the way Paul has put it in his report and the discussion we've had this evening would support the next item, as Councillor Barber suggests, being considered as such, and I would be in favour of that item in the next item as it is drawn, in fact, to leave the advisory CCTV in there as it is. In regard to the consultations, I certainly think we're statutorily obliged to have a consultation on the taxi policy thing anyway, so I think we've got to do that, whatever happens. I'm not sure that we would add anything further at this juncture, bearing in mind we're hamstrung by what we can do anyway, to the CCTV consultation. That would merely, to my mind, waste money and time.
Okay, fair point. Well, we've got a recommended decision here that I'll read out for you in a second, and a proposal that we separate the two. The recommended decision by the officers, by Mr. Donnelly, the licence and management recommended decision is the Colchester City Council do not mandate CCTV within Hackney carriages or private hire vehicles. Instead, we should encourage owners, operators and drivers to fit CCTV as a proportionate way of improving safety and reducing crime for both them and the travelling public. We should provide guidance on correct use of such systems as set by the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, encouraging those who choose to fit CCTV comply with the regulations. The matter could then be set out for public consultation. So I've got a recommendation decision there that is supported by the officers and a proposal and a second. Matthew?
Thanks, Chair. So just from my own point of view, and just if it clarifies things to the committee, there are two reports on the agenda tonight that relate to taxi policy. Then they're two separate issues. So I think the committee does, follow this, but this report and the decision is asking whether the committee effectively wants to consult on mandating CCTV in taxis or it doesn't want to consult. If it doesn't want to consult, then mandatory CCTV in taxis would not then form part of the additional policy because it wouldn't have been a proposal out for public consultation. So Paul will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is what the committee is being asked to decide. Do we consult on mandatory CCTV now or do we not? If that's helpful.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Obviously, there has been some confusion because my initial documents that went out, I think people were a little bit confused about me doing away with CCTV. Now, obviously, Matthew is the expert. I know the original question was, do we ask on mandatory CCTV? But of course, having listened to everything being said and what I wrote, in some regards, the question is, do you as a committee want to accept my recommendation and send that out to the taxi trade, in other words, and the public, i.e., do you agree with Paul Donachie that they should encourage CCTV rather than mandate it, or do you disagree and you think it should be mandated? So the way I see this report is that I'm asking you, what is your view on my recommendation? And then having made that decision, what are the public's views on the decision you've made on my decision, if that makes sense? So, okay.
I've got Councillor Powling. Is this on this subject?
Yes. Would it be possible I could propose that we do take the recommendation of the officer? Can I propose that one?
Have a seconder for that? Paul, Councillor Smith. So we're going to take a vote on that. I think the proposal by Councillor Scordis first of all, unless you're sticking with that, Councillor Scordis? Yes. Yes, okay. So we've got one that separates the two and consults on CTV separately from the initial policy, and the one that's now been proposed on taking the recommended decision. So I'll take them in the order I was given. So the first one, Councillor Scordis' proposal. All in favour? Three. Okay. And then the second recommendation, proposal by Councillor Bowling, is to take the recommended decision as read on page 15 on item 7. All those in favour? Can somebody count those, please? It's the majority. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Chair. We have a decision.
Chairman, as emailed earlier, were you okay if I departed the meeting now? Thank you.
And thank you very much for
reports this evening.
Thanks for pre-notifying. That seems like an opportune moment, Matthew, to have a PNB for 10 minutes, if that's okay. The Constitution says hour and a half, so it is an hour and a half with 5 minutes to go. So I think you could all have a PNB, physical needs break, if you need it. 5 minutes. Good evening again, reconvening the meeting. Thank you very much. Members, it's item 8 on the agenda this time. It's the licensing policy itself on private hire and hackney carriage vehicles. And I'd introduce the officer to introduce the item. In doing so, I would like you to join with me in noting the amount of work that's going into this and thank officers and team for such a huge amount of work that's changed an awful lot in this policy over the last few years. I tried to cross-reference them back to past policies and it improved no end, and I'm assuming a lot of this will be covered in your report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. The report before committee tonight seeks the approval of the Council's new draft hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy for the purpose of consultation. As the Chairman has just mentioned, it is a complete revision of the policy and has been done with the intention of ensuring the safety of the public whilst making the policy clearer and easier to understand. It takes into account the updated best practice guidance, the statutory standards and the Institute of Licensing suitability guidance. The report outlines at paragraph 6.6 the areas where views are sought and addresses matters where the Council stance does not necessarily reflect the statutory standards or best practice. As mentioned earlier in the Have Your Say, officers are not necessarily recommending a change but simply highlighting potential differences and seeking views. The entire policy will be subject to consultation, and the views of the trade and interested parties and public are encouraged and welcomed. We do actually have an additional matter, Chairman, which we'd like to include in the vehicle conditions, which would be wording to the effect that a vehicle cannot be plated in more than one authority area. I'm also mindful that Mr Moore in Have Your Say alluded to a few amendments that may need to be made. So I'd ask that members bear that in mind when approving it and perhaps approve subject to those amendments that he may send in if necessary. We're proposing a 3-month consultation because of the scale of the revisions. I wasn't proposing to go through the policy in great detail as the changes have been significant, but I'm very happy to answer questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Members. Councillor Scordis.
Yeah, just on the suggestion that they only operate within the area, what would happen, for example, if someone picked up outside a nightclub and they want to go to Elmsford Market, which is on the border, would that be perfectly fine, for example, but they couldn't be called out there? Just trying to understand that aspect.
It's not about the operation, it's where they're licensed. So we wouldn't allow a vehicle to be licensed in Colchester and tendering, for example. They couldn't hold two vehicle licences, Chairman.
Thank you for answering that question. Councillor Buston.
Thank you, Chair. Again, as before, I do commend the amount of work that's gone into this. A lot of people think it's just nipping and tucking, but I think there was a lot more than nipping and tucking on this occasion. And I think it's generally pretty good and it's generally pretty readable. There are a couple of points that I think we could do some nipping and tucking, and that they're just things that I've noticed I'm going through. On page 34 of 124, subparagraph 10, licensing decisions are made using the balance of probabilities test, i.e. an event more likely than not to have taken place, the benefit of the doubt will not be given. I know what you mean there, but I would suggest that it might be put in such a way that it is a little more explicit in tying the matter down to the civil standard of proof in court. And the civil standard of proof generally suggests along the lines on the evidence submitted and available, an event specified is more likely than not that a certain fact is true based upon the evidence presented. In other words, it's evidentially based. I think I would personally leave out the bit says the benefit of the doubt will not be given. I'm not so sure that we actually need to say that if we evidence the civil standard of proof, and there are plenty of definitions of that given. And I think that will assist us because we're then sticking to an established area of the law. Page 101 and 102 of 124. As you go through these things, you think of things that didn't really naturally occur. And this is Appendix 10, stretched limousines, vintage and classic vehicles, fire engines, licensing and use. Oh, that's interesting. And I suddenly remember crossing the road at the level crossing that's near my house in Wellesley Road, and I was confronted by a London bus, which is hired out for weddings and all sorts of things. And it's not impossible that they'd have more than 10 passengers on that. Would we require to license it? Question. I don't know. It's just something that appeared to me as I was actually going through it. Buses for weddings and the like. And Appendix 12, page 105. Yes, CCTV guidelines. That rather encapsulates what we were discussing in the last item. So I don't propose we go over that all over again. Safe to say that I think we made the right decision in relation to that matter, and I would support what has now been put into this appendix for that. Thank you. Lastly, item 9 on page 111. Oh no, that's next item. I'll refer to that when we get to it. My apologies, I got lost in my notes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
We're happy to change the burden, the wording, Chairman, that's not a problem. I think everything else was fine.
PSV.
Oh, PSV, yes, the buses is not us.
But is a private hire bus like that, hired for a wedding, is it still then a public service vehicle? That's the question.
There's an exclusion for wedding vehicles, so yeah, I don't know if there are any other licensing, but from our point of view, there's an exclusion for wedding vehicles.
Okay, no,
Okay.
I've no other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Boston, for the question, and thanks for the answers. Any other committee members wish to speak? I've got a question that Mr. Moore raised on page 27. He was talking about whether the knowledge test was applicable to one particular part of the trade and not the other. And I think that's the way he put it himself. Was there an answer to?
There is, Chairman. The knowledge test currently forms part of our driver stand. They have to do those before we're licensed as a driver. There's no, the question's been raised in, I think it's the best practice, that can be potentially a bar for private hire drivers, and in order to remove anything, to undue obstacles to them, whether there's a need for them to do it. I think the logic being that a private hire driver is booked in advance and knows and should know where they're going and can use sat-nav navigation, so they don't necessarily need to have the knowledge. I think it's a questionable point these days with everybody's access to satellite navigation and the booking through apps, so I'm not sure. So the suggestion is we put it out to see what people think. As I mentioned in Have Your Say, I think, having spoken to a few drivers, they like the ability to be dual licensed. They like to have the Hackney carriage and private hire, and they can move between trades. So they can, which they would not be able to do, because if it's decided that we want to remove the knowledge test, we would have to issue separate licenses. So it's very much a matter for consultation and people's views, which we'll bring back, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So further question I've got is how do we maximise, and I think Andrew referred to this earlier on, about maximise the numbers of people who respond. How can we, what new innovation can we have that actually gets thousands rather than tens of people replying to this consultation? How can we do that?
I don't know that we can guarantee to do it, Chairman, but previously we haven't made a substantial use of social media, so we can try that channel. I think that would be something that's relatively new for us, Chairman.
Councillor Powling, you've got a question?
I haven't got a question, but once again is to recommend like the report to accept it with the changes for them to amend what was pointed out by the gentleman said earlier. So they could look at that, take that into consideration and then amend to suit. I'd propose that.
Thank you very much. Have we got a seconder for that? Yes, Councillor Smith or Councillor Buston is fine. I've got one final question. This is because Councillor Barber very kindly did a little say about this earlier on about LGR, local government reform. How does this policy, this one we're about to put out for consultation for 3 months, compare to the policies of Braintree and Tendring and any other area that we may become linked with?
Thank you, Chairman. We are part of the Essex Licensing Officers Forum, and right back at the beginning, ages ago, there was a Essex-wide policy. Accepting that, it obviously has been amended and reflects each area's particular circumstances and how they choose to operate. But there is an Essex-wide flavour to the policy in itself, so that's the basis of it. As the statutory standards and the best practice have come in, the policies look more and more similar, to be honest, Chairman. So I think there's nothing that will be fundamentally different. We talk with Braintree and Tendring quite regularly now. So I don't think there's anything in here that will be dramatically different. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final speakers before we go to the vote? Councillor Law.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to thank officers for their ongoing work on this policy. I know this has taken some time, and I know that there's been concerns that because our policy is now quite out of date, it's out of kilter with best practice nationally and locally, and so I'm really pleased to see that this will hopefully bring us up to standard with that type of best practice and incorporate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful, Councillor Law. We've got a proposal and a seconder to adopt this recommendation, and the recommendation is to take this policy and put it into consultation. Can I have a show of hands, please?
Can I just say it was subject to the minor changes?
Of course.
Just to add that in, just in case it gets...
Yes, subject to minor changes. That's a good point, Councillor Pennell. Thank you. So that... Okay, that's passed. Next item on the agenda is item 9. And I'm pleased to let the licensing officer please present the report on caravan and campsite licensing processes and procedures.
Thank you, Chairman. This is coming just because it was in need of review. There hasn't been any fundamental change since the committee looked at this last time. So in essence, it's really just to note that the processes and procedures remain the same. We've done a slight update, make sure the links work, etc. But beyond that, hasn't changed since the committee saw it last time. Thank you.
That's brilliant news. So thank you very much. So members, make sure that the policy doesn't gather dust. I've got Councillor Buston who wishes to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is another one of those items that only you, I and Sarah know about, because we're the ones that have been here. Oh, you know about it as well, didn't you? Yes, sorry. I didn't think you were that old. Anyway, we've been doing this forever, and I got. You might remember this when you were Mayor of Mersey.
Very well.
We had all sorts of problems from Mersey. And a caravan site there, but we won't go into that now as an individual item. My question was, are we allowed, Sarah, in the policy to have a requirement, as we do in other licensing items, that the licence holder be a fit and proper person?
No. So I'm looking to Karen, but I do know, no, we aren't allowed to have that. Our licensing essentially stems from the planning permission. I don't know if Karen, if you want to add any further. Do you want to come and use my swap of officers?
Welcome to the table, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Buston. Yeah, it's not a consideration that we take into account when we receive an application. I mean, I must say that the applications are so rarely received. I feel like what's out there now is probably what will exist in Colchester. It would be really rare that another one would come in, mostly because of the planning ties of it. It's such a big planning consideration for someone to set up a holiday site with caravan units. So yeah, it's not within our remit to consider fit and proper for an applicant, unfortunately.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for that, because actually you will remember, and Sarah will remember, and David will remember, that the main issue, and probably Carl will remember as well, the main issue was that the person in question could have been challenged as to whether or not he was a fit and proper person, which caused the problems in the first place. If fit and proper person had been part of the licence description, all the problems we had could have been wrapped up in an afternoon, but they weren't. I just wonder if it's possible to make a comment in relation to that, to the Department of Government that actually deals with caravan licensing. Because across the piece, fit and proper person is something that actually does fall naturally into the scope of licensing, which is why we're here. And if a fit and proper person is not required to be a fit, if a person is not required to be fit and proper in order to hold a licence, then I wonder to a certain extent what we're doing licensing caravan sites. So if it's possible to ask that question, fine. Otherwise, I've no other question in relation to the policy because I can't. Thank you very much.
Is there any answer to that?
Yeah, I'm sure that we can raise a comment in relation to that. I was thinking, likewise, it's a little bit like with premises licences. We have the DPS, which have to have the personal licence, but the licence holder themselves, again, we don't have much control over them being fit and proper. So it's, again, a little bit of an anomaly, I suppose, in licensing. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Any other questions on this? Yes, Councillor Kafal.
Thank you, Chair. I already asked this question and received a written response from the offices, but in order to have them in our minutes, I would like to ask it again in person. Do we know if caravan and campsite licensing process and procedures covers areas that traveller communities use and occupy from time to time? And if so, did we consult with Gypsies and Travellers Essex, which is a community-led organisation, as well as Friends, Families and Travellers, the Essex County-wide Travellers Unit and the Enhanced Support and Access Team? Thank you.
When it comes to the traveller communities and the temporary sites, etc., that is all dealt with by Essex County Council.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
And permanent sites operated by local authorities are exempt.
Councillor Powley.
Once again, it's going back to what Councillor Buston said. I know within the policy it says that the council has the right to review at any time the licensing policy. It would actually be good to, I don't know if something could be slipped in there, that it's also the conduct of the owners of the park can have conditions put on them. What we've been talking about is the actual issue of some of the owners, the way they've acted, because it talks about antisocial behaviour. Well, some of the owners are actually blocking residents in, deliberately blocking the roads. So I don't know, let's say you can't, but it'd be good putting something there that the owner's conduct, we could put something on that. They're doing antisocial behaviour themselves.
Thank you, Councillor. We have to go away and put our heads together a little bit on that one, because I think, like Councillor Buston alluded to, we can't take that into consideration, but obviously if we raised a comment to government and had a bit of advice, or there is a really good member of staff that has trained us from elsewhere before who might have some more answers on that, but we can certainly raise the question.
Sadly, I think antisocial behaviour was by the occupants of the site rather than the owners of the site. I think it's in I see exactly where you're coming from there.
Yeah, it's the same. It's getting that point to put condition. There's a particular site which Roger was what about there. It was very interesting what was going on there.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you very much. So, looking for a proposer and a seconder for this, Councillor Buston and Councillor Powling. So this policy is not going to gather dust anymore. I'm looking for a show of hands on whether this is passed now to go back into the policy. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. which brings us on to, that's the end, isn't it? Well, oh, work programme. I forgot you, Matthew. I do apologise. How could I?
Thanks, Chair. The standard report, as the committee will know, there's a couple of changes just to note. The boat person policy has been deferred to the meeting in September due to planned sickness absence, and collection policy again deferred to meeting in September. But otherwise, that's the work programme. If the committee has any comments or requests, thank you.
Members, any comments on that work programme from September and onwards? Accepted, noted. Thank you very much. Thank you. That is the end. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you, members.